The Flashbang is a particularly unique item. Out of all items in Dead by Daylight, it is the only one that can be exclusively obtained through a perk. The Flashbang item and perk first entered the fog with the first Resident Evil chapter on the 15th of June 2021. But despite it being in the game for just over 3 years now, it can be uncommon to come across a player who can truly use them well. I think this is because, unlike other items, Flashbangs are single use. It can be hard to master them when they're gone in an instant, not to mention the fact that information about them is sparse. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Flashbangs in order to truly master them. To start off, we first need to go over how to obtain Flashbangs. While this may seem obvious, there's a little more to it than one might initially think. The description of the perk states that in order to get the Flashbangs, you need to repair generators for 40%, enter a locker, and then press the ability button. But what exactly does this mean? You might think you just have to do 40% of a gen, and then you're good, but it's not that simple. To activate the Flashbang perk, you need to repair 40% worth of a gen, which is 36 charges. To explain this better, I need to explain how repairing generators works in Dead by Daylight. Each generator has 90 charges, and by default, a survivor repairs generators at a rate of 1 charge per second. So if you were by yourself, it would take you 90 seconds to fully repair a generator. But there are various things in Dead by Daylight that can affect the amount of charges per second a survivor repairs. These things include perks, items, and the most notable being other survivors. When 2 survivors work in a generator, instead of working at a rate of 1 charge per second, they work at a rate of 0.85 charges per second. This means that the gen won't be completed in half the time, which would be 45 seconds, but rather in about 53 seconds. This effect also occurs when 3 survivors and 4 survivors work in a gen, making each survivor's repair speed go to 0.7 and 0.55 charges per second, respectively. What this means for Flashbangs is the less charges you repair per second, the longer the perk will take to activate. For example, it would take 36 seconds to activate the perk working alone on a gen at 1 charge per second, but if you had 2 survivors in a gen, it would take around 42 seconds to activate the perk. Of course, the inverse is also true, being the more charges you repair per second, the faster the perk will activate. So if you want to get your Flashbangs as soon as possible, you need to avoid doing generators with other survivors. And if you really want to get them faster, you can bring toolboxes and gen speed perks to get them even faster. But to be honest, I don't think it's entirely necessary to waste perk slots for getting Flashbangs faster, when there are much better ones you can use to synergize with, that I'll talk about later. Now that we know how to best get Flashbangs, we can go over the armoring time, range, angle of effect, sound, and the requirements needed to successfully pull off a Flashbang. To start off, Flashbangs take 2 seconds to explode, so 2 seconds after you press the M2 or use item button, the Flashbang will explode. Flashbangs will be dropped immediately after pressing M2. The Flashbang will be placed on the ground where your survivor was at the moment you press the use item button. Now let's look at the range of the Flashbang. After lots of testing, I've come to the conclusion that the Flashbang has a range of a little over 4 meters, so about 4.5 or 5 meters. I measured this using the segmented walls at the edge of the maps. If you're unaware, these wall segments are 8 meters long each. As you can see in the footage on the screen, the Flashbang range is effective just a little over halfway through this wall segment. So this would be, as previously mentioned, around 4.5 or 5 meters. Now I'm going to show you some examples of a Flashbang being just in range and just out of range from both the survivor's and killer's perspective. With range covered, we can look at the angle of effect of the Flashbang. After testing the Flashbang, I found that the Flashbang seemed to have a 180 degrees angle of effect. If the Flashbang is in front of the killer, even slightly, it should blind them. This means that you can even blind a killer who has their face stuck to a wall. But as you can see in this clip, the Flashbang is slightly behind the killer so they won't get blinded. But what about the killer's vertical view? If a killer looks directly up, they shouldn't get blinded by a Flashbang in front of them. But if the killer looks down even slightly, they are susceptible to being blinded, as seen on the footage on the screen. So if you're playing killer and you want to dodge a Flashbang, my advice is to look up until you can't anymore, to guarantee you won't get blinded. If you were to try and look away from it horizontally, you may still get blinded even if the Flashbang isn't on your screen, so looking up is easier and safer. The only time you should look away horizontally rather than vertically is if the Flashbang was placed on an elevated surface, like stairs. If a Flashbang is both in range and within the angle effect, there's still a chance it won't blind a killer. This is because the flashbang also needs to have no objects between it and the camera view. For example, if you sit in a flashbang as a survivor, it won't be able to blind anyone because you're in the way. Another example is trying to flashbang a killer when they're on the other side of a vault. As you can see from the footage, no matter where the flashbang is thrown, even if it's on a killer screen, the killer won't get blinded. One exception I found to this though, was that flashbangs seem to still be able to blind through dropped pallets. I've heard claims that if you drop a flashbang on the side of a pallet that's higher, the killer won't get blinded, but in my testing I wasn't able to recreate this. As long as the flashbang was placed in front of the pallet and not around a corner, the killer got blinded. Perhaps I'm missing something about this claim. If I am, please leave a comment down below correcting me. Finally, let's talk about the sound given off by the flashbang. Once a flashbang is dropped, there are two sounds that are played. A small grunt from your survivor, as well as the sound of flashbang sizzling as it hits the ground. Like most sounds in DBD, it's quiet the further you are from where the flashbang was activated. It also makes less sound if there's a wall between where the flashbang was dropped and the player. Here's a comparison of what they sound like up close and what they sound like through walls. Now that we know the capabilities of the flashbang, we can go over when, where, and how to use them best. But before we do, I'd like to ask that you like and subscribe if you've learned something so far. I plan on making more videos like this, and each sub is a lot of help. Thank you. Let's start by going over how to successfully blind a killer while in chase. You're not slowed down while dropping a flashbang, so this means there's little risk in using them in chase. The only risk being accidentally blinding yourself, which you can mitigate by moving your camera from the flashbang. To consistently hit blinds while in chase, you need to learn how far a killer runs in 2 seconds, as this is how much closer the killer will get to the flashbang once it has been dropped. The killer needs to be within the range of the flashbang after running for 2 seconds, so the distance between you and the killer when you drop the flashbang is very important. On screen now is some footage of how far a killer travels in 2 seconds. Most killers will move at 4.6 meters per second, so they'll move 9.2 meters in 2 seconds. Slower killers, like the Huntress, will move at 4.4 meters per second, so they'll move 8.8 meters in 2 seconds. If we factor in the range of the flashbang, which will round down to being 4 meters for simplicity's sake, that means you need to drop the flashbang when you're about 13 meters to 8.5 meters away from the killer. But dropping them when the killer is at 13 or 8.5 meters is a little risky, as it leaves a little room for error, and you're counting on the killer being just in range or just before they go out of range. So to be safe, I'd aim to drop it when the killer is 12 or 10 meters away. If we go back to how we measured distance before, 12 meters is equal to 1.5 wall segments, and 10 meters is equal to 1.25 wall segments. It is also best to drop the flashbang when not in view of the killer, otherwise they'll simply lock up. Dropping the flashbang after you've turned a corner for a bit, or have momentarily broken line of sight, will make it less likely for the killer to hear the flashbang being dropped, and they won't see the survivor animation of dropping it. Another good time to blind a killer is when they're locked in animation, the best example being while they break a pallet. It takes a killer around 2.34 seconds to break a pallet, so as soon as they start the break animation, you can drop the flashbang to easily blind them. Doing this is actually a slightly better alternative to flashlight blinding, as you're not slowed down while you're blinding the killer. Now we can finally go over flashbang saves. There are two types of ways you can get flashbang saves. The first and most well known is dropping the flashbang so it explodes as the killer finishes the pickup animation, and the second is blinding the killer while they transport a survivor. To successfully pull off the second method of getting a flashbang save, you can just use all the tips I've previously mentioned when getting a flashbang blind while in chase. The two main differences being the killer is slightly slower and they won't be chasing you, so you'll need to learn how far a killer carrying a survivor will travel after 2 seconds, which is being shown on screen now. You'll also need to guess which hook the killer is bringing the survivor to. With this information you can place the flashbang either at the hook or on the path the killer will take to get to the hook to get the save. This method can be tricky as an aware killer can just lock up, but if you just do it around corners or even holes or drops, it's less likely they'll even think to avoid it. Now let's look at getting flashbang saves while a killer does a survivor pickup animation. The pickup animation is about 3 seconds long, so with the flashbang arming time being 2 seconds, that means you need to drop the flashbang 1 second into the pickup animation. This leaves very little time to position yourself. In order to be able to make it this close in this time, you need to be making your way towards the killer while they're cleaning their weapon, after downing the survivor. All the while ensuring the killer doesn't see you. You need to successfully read the killer and guess when they're going to pick up the survivor. They might fake it and catch you out, or you might think they're faking it, hesitate, and not make it close enough in time. Learning when a killer is going to pick up a survivor is a skill that just comes with practice. You can reduce the chance of a killer faking the pickup by making them think no survivor is nearby. Do this by making sure the killer doesn't see you at any moment before downing the survivor. Now that we know how to use flashbangs, let's go over some perks that enhance them. The first and definitely most useful perk to pair with Flashbang is Background Player. Background Player is almost a must if you're going for flashbang saves. The main challenge faced trying to get flashbang saves during the pickup animation is the little time you have to cover the distance. This perk allows you to cover much more distance in the short time you have. It allows you to hide further away from the killer while they chase the survivor you want to save. Overall, this perk will greatly increase your chances of pulling off successful flashbang saves. This next perk might come as a surprise, but Saboteur actually pairs quite nicely with Flashbang if you're going for flashbang saves while the killer transports the survivor. As mentioned before, you need to intercept the killer as they're approaching the hawk and blind them. Seeing all the hawks allows you to best guess where the killer will be taking the survivor and how you can plan accordingly. These next two perks allow you to position yourself before the survivor is downed. Bond and Empathy can both be used to help you judge when a survivor is about to go down and when you need to get ready for the flashbang save. These are especially useful if you're playing solo queue, as your team can't tell you where they are. Finally, Alan Wake's Champion of Light can be alright for its hindering effect, as dropping flashbangs don't slow you down. It's a nice little effect that's effective if you plan on using your flashbangs during chases to give yourself a bit more distance. While it might be worth the perk slot over other perks, it can be a bit of fun using the flashbangs in an offensive manner. That concludes everything you need to know about flashbangs. If there's anything you think I missed, please let me know in a comment down below. I hope you learned something today. If you enjoyed this video, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. That's all for now. Thank you, and goodbye.